Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. I'd like to talk about the pardon of Hunter Biden. From a constitutional perspective, hi. Coming at you from Orange County. You may have heard that President Biden is reported to have pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, in an interesting way, not for crimes committed and convicted of, but also, not merely for that, but also for an entire period from 2014 until this week, including crimes committed this week, this past week. Well, obviously, that would include crimes that have not even been discovered, if such crimes exist. Makes you wonder why the pardon would go up to this week. Obviously, there's not time for investigation and conviction, charging and all that stuff, conviction, for crimes including this week. Now, pardons have been issued before for crimes that were not convicted, charged and convicted. Anybody know the most famous example of that? That's right. President Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. Okay, so a pardon can include whatever language the president wants to include. And Biden has been criticized for making his son, quote, above the law. And I'd like to focus in on that and drill down on that, because I don't think that that's true. The pardon is entirely legal. It's within the law. I want to point out a few provisions in the U.S. Constitution. I'm in this book here, which has a copy of the Constitution. It's the Federalist Papers, Introduction and Notes by Charles R. Kessler, the Signet Classic Edition. Of course, the Federalist Papers were originally written pseudonymously by Publius, who we now know were Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, in the second paragraph, says this Constitution, ... shall be the supreme law of the land. All right. Well, what's this Constitution say? Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution says the president shall be commander-in-chief of blah, 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 okay, ... And he, that refers to the president, in case you didn't know that, he is gender neutral there, as we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast, if you're paying attention. He shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. There's no other condition on that power. There's no restriction on how those pardons should be worded, or what they could possibly pertain to other than the language there. What I love about this edition of the Federalist Papers is when you look at the U.S. Constitution, you can see the page numbers in the Federalist that discussed those particular provisions of the Constitution. So, for example, the pardon power has pages 445 to 446 in this edition. So I can just go over to page 445 and see that it's referring probably to number 78 written by Hamilton. And the reason I know that is because there's a handy dandy little title. 73 talks about the veto power, among other things. 74 is the commander-in-chief power and the pardon power. Now, when you read that, what stands out to me, and it probably would stand out to you if you're reading it carefully, is that the president has a plenary power, except in cases of impeachment, to issue reprieves and pardons for federal offenses, and the discussion here by Hamilton only takes issue with, at first, who should have the power, not whether it should exist, per se. There is a mention, very slightly, of whether it should exist. And all he says is humanity and good policy conspire to dictate that the benign prerogative of pardoning should be as little as possible fettered or embarrassed. Takes it for granted that humanity and good policy are reasons for its existence. The criminal code of every country partakes so much of necessary severity that without an easy access to exceptions in favor of unfortunate guilt, justice would wear a countenance too sanguinary and cruel. Okay. Well, then he gets into that's about all he says as far as whether it should exist. He thinks it's just obvious that it should exist. The pardon power. But who should have it? And he doesn't think the legislature should have it. He doesn't think that the judicial system have it. If the judicial system had it, that would be weird, because the judicial system, this is supposed to be a check on the judicial system, the excesses of the legislature and the judiciary acting in concert to produce laws that are too harsh, and including the prosecution of those laws. Of course, the prosecution is an executive function. So he makes an argument that one person, not a council, should have the power. And one of the reasons is because in cases of insurrection or rebellion, and he says it this way, he says, in seasons of insurrection or rebellion, he takes it just for granted that there will be such seasons. There are often critical moments when a well-timed offer of pardon to the insurgents or rebels may restore the tranquility of the Commonwealth, and which, if suffered to pass unimproved, may never be possible afterwards to recall. The dilatory process of convening the legislature or one of its branches for the purpose of obtaining its sanction to the measure would frequently be the occasion of letting slip the golden opportunity. The loss of a week or a day or an hour may sometimes be fatal. Wow. It should be observed I'm in Federalist 74, Hamilton. It should be observed that a discretionary power, which is what this is, with a view to such contingencies, may be occasionally conferred upon the President. It may be answered in the first place, it is questionable whether in a limited constitution that power could be delegated by law. And in the second place, that it would generally be impolitic beforehand to take any step which might hold out the prospect of impunity. A proceeding of this kind out of the usual course would likely to be construed into an argument of timidity or weakness and would have a tendency to embolden guilt. That's all he says about the pardon power. And there's a little bit in a different section on the supremacy clause, but I think it's worth pondering and reflecting on the fact that what Hamilton calls discretionary power in Federalist 74, referring to the pardon power, refers to the law of the land, supremacy clause. So Hunter Biden is not above the law. You got to drill that down into your skull. The pardon power is within the law. It's discretionary. It's discretion. And it's lawful. The reason I'm marinating in this is that you're not I think it would be helpful if when you see people use rhetoric like Hunter Biden is above the law or whatever, that you distinguish that you distinguish the issue of the law from politics. And I think it would be helpful for you to see that in the case of discretionary power, like the pardon power, which is lawful, politics and law come together in a way that might disturb you. And I'm hoping it does disturb you because that is the reason why it's so important for ordinary Americans to be involved in politics, be involved in the political process. This thing cannot continue without you, without an attention span. And what I see as the greatest threat to the United States is not a foreign power. I'm with Abraham Lincoln on this in his Lyceum address. The greatest threat to the United States will come from within. It will be from the American people, which does not function like a people. They don't function like people at all. People are supposed to have attention spans. God created us differently than the animals, differently than rocks and trees. We have consciousness. We have an attention span. We have rationality. We can think. We're made in the image of God. Those things can be corrected when in error. Those can be honed and improved over time with the correct training. What I don't see from parents is a radical acceptance of their responsibility under God as parents to make sure their kids are carefully trained in reasoning and taking responsibility as citizens. I don't see that. And I don't see that as a main function of the educational system either. What I see is constant complaining, BS, and excuses for not doing that. I see a lot of keyboard warriors and memes and stuff like that. That's not political activism. I do that for fun, but that's not really serious engagement with our duties as citizens. And you ought to be able to understand the powers and duties of the president and be able to make an argument for or against them. But the pardon power is there. If you want to get rid of it or you want to curb it, that's a constitutional amendment. You got to do that. But this is all within the law. And it's just an argument that you have to be paying more attention to who is the president than maybe you do. What are you doing to sharpen your understanding of the design of the United States, the wise design? What are you doing to sharpen your persuasive abilities, your reasoning abilities, your abilities to come to see truth for what it is and to spot falsehood? Are you doing anything? Do you take this stuff seriously? When I look at my friends list and I engage with people, I got to be honest with you, I don't see much evidence of seriousness. And these are people that I like, but I don't see a lot of evidence of seriousness, serious engagement. That will be our undoing. It won't matter who's president, ultimately.